Welcome back to another episode of Beyond the Brief. Today we are very, very fortunate to have Ariel Wengroff with us. Ariel is the EVP of Communications and Marketing at Ledger. Ariel, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Indeed. Why don't you get us started by telling us a bit about your background and what led up to you being at Ledger?
Well, my background might not make the most sense when you look at it on paper, but I've always been interested in connecting with people in whatever has the least red tape. I'm kind of always moving in that direction. So I actually started out my career in politics in Vermont. I was working, really on the thing that felt like the closest to direct democracy for me at the time. I was a special assistant to the governor, and I handled emergency management response, and it was kind of when social media was just kicking off and they were like, send the young person to go deal with it. And by doing so, it really afforded me a lot of opportunities to think about really big problems, because when you're the first connection, when you're doing constituency work or social media, you see people's problems on a daily basis. And Vermont was such a small state, people would walk up to you a month later and say, hey, did you work on this issue for me, right? And so you had this accountability. So it was amazing at the time to talk to someone, introduce a bill, get the bill passed, and then be able to say, hey, I did this, right? And so when I started to think about a career full-time in DC, I started to realize I'm not going to get anything done here. Like, I'm just going to be pontificating for years with colleagues, but not helping people. And what's a way to create change today? Actually, that's media, right? Storytelling is the way that we connect with people on a daily basis. I always used to say, you want to be the song that someone remembers, not the homework assignment. And so when I got the opportunity to join Vice Media, I jumped at it. And I really got to be a part of Vice, which was a global youth media company, for over 5 years, and be a part of everything from Vice News to shoots all over the world, from, Saudi to UAE to Milan to, the most random places in America, to then have a chance to create a show with Gloria Steinem, which was about women all over the world and some of the different issues that are affecting them. And, at that point, it was like, okay, let's go on the ground, do Hunter S. Thompson style journalism, get as close to being there yourself, and then put it on YouTube and make it so, Vice was an original YouTube partner. So at that moment when digital media was emerging, we were the ones that capitalized on it and, got everything wrong and then got everything right. And really were able to resonate and say young people deserve and care about news. And so once we were pushing and pushing and pushing, at a certain point, the duopoly of Facebook at the time and Google suddenly started changing algorithms. And then that's actually when we had a lot of issues figuring out, okay, what's the long-term viability when you're not in control? And so you had two issues. One, young people deserve great content, but you're beholden to the advertisers for clicks. And two, we have a message that we want to get out directly, but we don't control it because algorithms are in control. And as these centralized databases got bigger and bigger, we really lost touch. And so I was really interested in my friendships and in my work with the creator economy that was merging. And so I had my own startup after Vice, with a few different brands that was all about using and working with different people to be the faces of brands, of issues that they cared about, and making it about them and not shame-based. And then advising a TMT fund on the creator economy. And through that, I started learning about blockchain. And again, it was like, okay, there's a friction point here. I've reached the red tape. What happens next? And what I felt was happening next was blockchain creates an intergenerational opportunity for people to be able to connect on the issues that they care about, and for creators to actually own the things they make, track the funds that they can get for it, but for that to go into different categories of people's lives. Like, the creator economy was an entry point for me. And so when in 2021, I got connected to Ian Rogers and Pascal Gauthier at Ledger, which is, a world leader in securing digital value in your digital identity, I was like, hey, this is a challenge that I'm really interested in. It's an opportunity that is inevitable, and they're really interested in education. I want to make sure people have the choice to have a seat at the table. And so something that started years ago around sort of like direct advocacy, direct democracy, connecting with people, creating stories to connect with people and give them a chance and a choice, kind of led through these different vectors of communication and has now like led me into that next frontier, which is really Ledger and really what's going on, and sort of this like next wave of communication and connection. So it's really interesting, and it's been an unlikely path over the last 15 years, but I always kind of want to be in that futurist arena of what's next in how we work with people, and that's what brought me here.
What a great, thank you for describing that. It's so clear, the through line, right? The enablement and making a difference and not being in a role where you can't actually create some impact on scale. At least that's what I'm hearing. Does that sound right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So you kind of skipped over the fact that you were the one of the youngest people to be nominated for an Emmy for the work you did for the it was a documentary, right?
Yeah, the docu-series Woman that we did with Gloria.
Yeah. Well, congratulations for that. That's super cool.
Thank you.
Yeah, big fan of Vice. I wish Vice continued to thrive like it once did. So we definitely need voices in the world that break through like that. It definitely seems that you hit on it. The algorithms are working against us for sure. One thing that, I love the way you describe Ledger specifically around digital identity, because I think that on the surface, a lot of people think, financial first, or some money value kind of component first. It makes a ton of sense to me. But how is it and from a product portfolio perspective, how's that all fit together?
I mean, it's really interesting because when Ledger was created, if you look at some of the original pitch decks, it's really on a mission to give people ownership and control over their digital lives, right? It was created in response to the Bitcoin standard and like needing to have something secure and private for peer-to-peer payment. But if you think about what's happening over time around that from 2008 to now on the internet, every single thing we do has a version that exists online. Like we use these words like tokenization, which I think for the average person feels complicated, but it just really means that there's a version of something physical that will be digital. And as someone whose whole career has been digital, I mean, if you had told me when I was growing up that my career would be on this thing called the internet, I probably would have been confused by that, And so really what it means is that for Ledger, we started around the concept of crypto and really dominated that vertical. We secure over 20% of Bitcoin globally. We've really become the place, if you know, type of an experience. But our plans have always been around anything for digital private property. So if you think about it, like I have an iCloud account, all my memories are on it. I'm not attracting anything, but if I were to lose access to that iCloud account, I actually don't have any right to get it back, right? And so if you think about that across these other areas, my health records, different apps where I'm storing information, all of these things have been built on software that doesn't know whether it'll exist in 5 years or not. And so for Ledger, it makes a lot of sense that as people start to have more value in different places online, you want to be able to manage that in a way where you have ownership for the long term. And for us, that's really empowering for individuals over time. So I'm really excited for us to be finally like going into that venture. And with the acceleration of AI, which comes up in every conversation today, all that really means is that things are getting faster. And AI creates abundance and crypto creates scarcity. And so we're the tool that helps bring that scarcity and control back into place.
So let's dig into that a little bit, because I agree. Abundance is a great way of framing. We think of AI as a tool, right, or a set of tools that accelerate, hopefully, our ability as humans to do what we innately can do and do together, not necessarily apart, although it certainly can play that role. But talk to us about the scarcity side. What's that? What's that mean? Because there's lots of ways you could take that.
I would say there's two ways to look at it. With crypto, it's that actually with Bitcoin, there's a certain amount of Bitcoin, or there's a certain amount of these different chain, tokens, and so you own a little piece of it, and you actually want to show that you own it, and you are who you say you are. And on the identity side for scarcity, there's only one of me in the world. There have been deep fakes over time, right? And that's increasingly so. And so how do I, over time, prove that I am who I say I am? How does the next generation, when they apply for school, show that they're that person versus the deep fake that's applying for them for college? And so really what you want to do is be able to apply like a token to each version of these categories so that you're able to, collate them and basically maintain proof of you in this experience. And it's not the simplest concepts, and so I think the simplicity comes from actions, which is why we're really excited to be getting to a place where we'll be able to share our roadmap of what we're going to be doing on the AI side, which will help kind of bring that proof of you into fruition. And what I will say is I think so much of the tech conversations today are quite dystopic. And so in our role as storytellers or people who are building brand, it's like, how do you bring more neutrality or optimism to a conversation that is something that feels much more akin to the Minority Report of 25 years ago than the sort of opportunities that we have in our future, which anyone now can build something for themselves. And so there's actually a lot of really incredible tools and things that have probably yet to even be discovered.
I love the notion of empowerment of the individual through control and certainty, right? It seems like but that's a really complex equation, and there are many forces out there, commercial forces principally, and a lot of dark forces even, that are working against that. And in some respects, it's very technical, and yet at the same time, it's very simple. Right? Blockchain just makes it simple because it's binary. It's on some level, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So talk about the tension there of, how do you draw people, not just the bad actors or the early adopters? How do you draw the majority into the space of understanding the value proposition? Because it's, especially if they enter through the cryptocurrency door. Is it natural then, as part of your customer experience, that you create the ability for them to experience other ways to manage their identity in ways that really open their eyes?
Yeah, I mean, it's been a progression over time. Like, if you've come in as someone who's participating in crypto, the great thing is we've advanced our Ledger Wallet experience. So if you come in, you're not just needing it to sort of like buy and hold. We have so many of the top partners in the world: MoonPay, Coinbase, anyone you can think of is integrated. And so you can have the most secure experience with choice. It's basically like getting a sky scanner in your pocket. And from there, you can kind of do everything you need. And so on the digital identity component, we have passkey, which means like you can use it for your login. So you could log into your X account, you could log into so many different things actually using your ledger. And so we're finding that people have reasons to actually have multiples to start. But then for new folks, actually, we did a partnership this year with the San Antonio Spurs, who are having a great season. We are jokingly calling it the Ledger Effect, although they've been working very hard for years. And that was a really incredible experience. That was a partnership that I led with the team and with Pascal, our CEO. And, we were the first European company to do a jersey patch deal with the NBA. They have an incredible sort of French connection. And for folks who are outside of the category, when they see that type of experience, that's the perfect way that we want them to understand. Because to your point, for the first person or the bad actor, it's like, well, the beginnings of the internet was the first person and the bad actor, right? Like, you talk about the Signal app, anything that is going to be used well and in mass has good and bad use cases. And the beauty of technology is that it can be used for many things. I think we come from a philosophy that we wouldn't want it to be so limited from the start, because then we would also know too much about the user, right? Like, we don't take user data, and we're very proud of that.
I love it. So take us on a journey on on your ideal customer, and what's the like buying committee / universe? Is it individual first? Or is there an enterprise or corporate play as well? Let's talk about that a bit.
Yeah, well, I'm glad you asked about that. So we have two sides. We have the retail side that we've been talking about so far, and we have a few different types of customers. We have one that might be more of like a trader and someone that's probably also on Robinhood buying, split stocks, or they've got multiple screens open. They're very sort of like savvy in that regard, and they're interested, they're very committed. And so that ledger is like the next layer that they need for those types of trades. And they're more likely to be early, right? They might also be a collector. Then you've got someone that maybe cares really a lot about ownership and freedom. And they really believe, no matter where they are in the world, because we have to remember Ledger actually ships to over 160 locations, on the planet, that they want to have more choice and control. And that might be because of the ethos of what they believe in, but it also might be because there's inflation or an unstable government or something that is going to make them feel like the ledger gives them access to their value and there's no other way. Then we also sort of have this like internet early adopter who is more likely to be living a lot online. I think the whole next generation just is in this bucket because they know they need a passive income source from the start. They're doing things constantly on different websites all the time. And, they're FaceTiming their friends while they're playing a game that they're like buying digital skins on, right? Like this is just part of how they live. And then we do this for enterprise. So we have a really thriving enterprise business. It's been around for over half a decade. And we do what we do on the retail side at scale for governments, banks, large institutions, crypto exchanges. And what's really interesting through our multi-sig product is you could be a family office or a smaller business and you want to have a percentage of your value that's kept, with digital assets or things like that. And you might use it in that regard. And we also just announced something called Ledger Enterprise HSM, which makes it so that you could do it on site. So like we always used to play this game at Ledger, which is what movie plots couldn't exist if you just had a ledger. And on the enterprise side, there's a lot of, large scale hacks and stories that you hear about that couldn't have happened if you actually just had this on site. So it's really an infrastructure experience. And it's the same thing as, 15 years ago, if you said to someone, or recently, like, when's the last time you sent an international email? They would be very confused.
Right.
Just send international telegrams all the time. And I think we're very much in this sort of like infrastructure upgrade moment. And so for the average person or business, I would hope actually most of the time they don't even have to think about this. The challenge is that, and this is a great thing for marketers and brand builders, like we've been raised on the experience with technology that we shouldn't have to think about having choice. We've been raised on convenience. But the problem is that convenience has stripped choice from us. And so how do we understand what we deserve without sacrificing convenience?
All while understanding the possibilities, right? Because I think so often, as much as there's an abundance of choice, the visibility for most is so limited. And I do think that, playing a role in democratizing access to choice and control is a really powerful notion and has massive scale and solves a lot of the dilemmas of the downside of commercialization, right?
Right, right, exactly. I think that's important. And also, I think there was a moment where people were like, well, how much do I actually need to have something that's physical? And we're actually seeing in today's economy that being in the business of making atoms or in a hardware business, as our CEO just put out this thought leadership piece on Revenge of the Atoms. And I think that's really this sort of like affirming moment that we're in actually, where people do really want to have multiple devices for different use cases because they don't want to be attached to one thing all the time. So it's emerging in and of itself.
Yeah. I noticed that you are very active in a group in Paris, people in Paris, and you through your through line, part of your through line, I think, is always being connected to the creative community. Talk a little bit about that as you think of the creator economy, because I mean, one of the dynamics that's happening in the job market, in the and you touched on it, where early adopters tend to. And younger folks have not only a core job, main job, but also side gig stuff. So there's a couple of dynamics there: creative economy, creator economy, and like sources of revenue and identity and financial control. So there's a lot there. Talk a little bit how you think about it as a marketer in opening the aperture for people that have the appetite to solve those issues.
Well, I'm actually so glad you brought up people in Paris, because my entire career was networking, right? Like nothing that I've done has made sense on paper. And it's come from me always raising my hand and saying, can I stay late to do this thing? Could I go to this event? And I think it's harder and harder for people to figure out how to connect in a way that doesn't feel like the cold call is just overwhelming. And so these types of events are a great way where myself, my friend Joy, who's the CMO at Back Market and was at Patagonia and Sonos, and my dear friend Jackie, who was at Refinery 29 and was part of the Lovies, which is the International Webbies. and now is running her own agency where she represents people who are sort of more of the creative economy. Invite people in Paris, anyone, it's generally expats, but anyone's welcome, just to get to know each other, talk through challenges, but also hire each other for projects. And that's like what you have to do. And this is true in work also, especially for younger people that you're trying to get promoted. You have to say their name and you have to say what they did over and over again. And so it's our job to like shepherd a bigger group together and say, you need work. We know people who have budgets. We know people who have money. And I think for the creator economy, like with the acceleration of AI, I don't think it actually removes the need for creativity. It increases the need for curation and to find great people that you know can curate an experience that doesn't feel like the direct consumer saturation where you could look at a slide of 20 brands and it felt like one. And we're sort of entering that. And on the finance side, you can't have security and wellness security if you don't have financial security, right? Like those are those base needs of stability. So I would say that it's all coming back around because I first learned about blockchain because I wanted my creator friends and writers and producers to have more access and ownership. And now I'm bringing it back around to bring them into this space because we're finally getting to a point where they can. And I want the next gen to still feel like they know how to access their own sort of personal board and ask for help around the work that they need because, in today's world, that can be really hard to approach.
Yeah, I find those kind of groups that the impetus of people in Paris, the way you connect and think about things differently. A lot of times I have an idea of a couple things I want to talk to certain people about that are notional. And inevitably, I get 5 more things to add to the possibility of what the future could hold. It just can't happen through a box. It can't happen through an email. It's not happening in the, Discord areas as much as it, does when you're really with people. And it's not all the time, right? Sometimes it's a great coffee or a glass of wine, but and that's not so bad either, right? We need that time in life as well.
Right. I mean, I
So
will say and people in Paris is actually kind of like inspired by a group that's done in New York, which is the Breakfast Club, which is hosted by Ben Dietz, who's a former Vice colleague, and they get together every Wednesday. And there's a digital group I'm part of that was started by Andrew Steinthal, who created The Infatuation and sold it to Chase. And there are folks in that group that I haven't actually met in person, but if we reach out to each other for something, like we've always got each other's back. And I think to your point, you brought up Woman earlier, like Woman happened because when Gloria was coming to the office, that day I went up to Shane, who is a former CEO and co-founder of Vice, and said, well, I love Gloria Steinem. I want to be in the room for that meeting. And it was Shane, me, Gloria, and Amy Richards. And Shane was like, yeah, raise your hand, like, let's go. But if I hadn't had the chance to walk up to him, if I was only working like remote and tried to ping him on Slack, it just wouldn't have happened the same. And so I'm really hoping that we can continue, especially in our work, which is so much more about like human connection, how we can foster those kinds of opportunities for this generation that's looking for work and the next one that's coming up.
So let's talk about that a little bit. If you look at the way pop culture depicts the crypto and cyber world, it's very, black hoodie, bro culture. As a marketer, how are you inviting other people in? And what's the roadmap for the Ledger brand because even the fact that it's called Ledger, right, which takes us back to a piece of paper and a pen. What latitude are you building into the restating the new meaning of what Ledger is?
Well, when I joined, Ledger was really known as a utility. And I think what's great is it's always had strong product market fit because the technology and security are on point. And so I'm not selling Coke versus Pepsi. Like I have the opportunity in my work to take great technological work and then try to make it approachable for the everyday person. And that's actually a pleasure because I'm learning and it's essential. And so we have this thing called the Donjon, which is our white hat hackers that sort of like hack for good. And so I'm like, okay, cool. I've basically got like a crazy detective science lab. So that's a dream for a storytelling perspective. And then for a physical device, cultural authority builds product authority. So if I can transition this ledger device from being seen as something you throw in a drawer to being something that says a piece about your identity and who you are, then I've done my job. But that's only existing if I work with different communities. Because in today's world, there's not 3 channels. It's like a tiny sea of niche builds mass. And so I have to be okay with the fact that the brand can be many things to many people. And that is actually how it should be today. It should never be one experience. And so it's been a really great thing of transitioning language, working with amazing people, like when we did our, iced out ledger with Gunna at the Met Gala, or had Snoop wearing one at WrestleMania. But then it might also be, this recent media tech vulnerability that we disclosed where, every Android could be hacked basically in less than a minute, and that's from our donjon. And so all of these things build these layers of authority while also bringing in this sort of premium factor. Because I never wanted the brand to feel cool, because cool has a beginning and end. I want the brand to feel alive. And therefore it can bring in all of these different audiences at once. So from a marketing perspective, I'm not a marketer. I come from a brand story building perspective. So to me, I'm I want the story to be so big that everyone sees themselves in it. And I want the legacy of it to be so long that multiple generations have the ability to participate. And that's actually why sports has been such a great partner, because great sports teams treat themselves like nation states. And that's a really interesting kind of journey to get to go on together for a period of time.
Yeah, they transcend the sport even, right? I mean, in a way that it's cultural, their cultural relevance moves out of the league, if you will. How do you pay attention? What are the things you do to look for those ideas on the rise in culture that you can affiliate with logically and authentically? Because that's a fail point for most brands, right? They market it. Right. They Beyonce drinking Pepsi, which nobody thinks she does. Right. So
yeah.
what?
For us, there's a couple of ways. I think to your point, you have to figure out how it actually exists in the world. You can't try to fit it into the world. Right. So I can't say suddenly that Ledger is something that it's not. What I can do is know, hey, actually Ledger has the most premium customers in the world. So it would really make a lot of sense for Ledger to be accessorizing with Balenciaga, because Balenciaga customers are Ledger customers, and we both have something to gain from each other because we're innovation and they're incredible prestige. And so creating an accessory and marketing it in a market like the US and the UAE, which are big for us, makes a lot of sense. But then at the same time, on the complete other end of the spectrum, we have the 3rd largest education platform in the world for digital assets, and that's free. And so I have a whole college initiative with my team where we're actually working with different blockchain clubs, and the brand relationship there, it just has young people using it all the time. And then they make their own content and they share just why it's a part of the beginning of their banking experience. So you really have to have the full gamut, and we're kind of constantly ideating. Also, you kind of have to be hyper online. I always see everything online before the team does. And, they know I'm psychopathic about it, but you have to know the breathing rate of what's going on around you, and be willing, treat it like a newsroom. You have to treat your brand like a newsroom. So we really do at Ledger. And that's also what keeps it interesting after, almost 5 years.
Yeah, I think the brands that don't do that, and even unabashedly research or pre-test creative, which to me is just nauseating. I mean, there's a purpose for research, certainly, but I've always said that if you can show me a research tool that will define love on terms we'll all agree on, let's test the work with that.
That's a great way to put it.
Right. And until you get to that, I mean, because it is a belief system by design, and so unique to each individual. But how do you tap into some of those veins? And do you give your permission to have bad days as a newsroom coming to life?
Oh my gosh, yeah. I mean, no day is a 10 out of 10. I think something that we talk about is the fact that you have to give your team space to make mistakes, because when you're testing things, not everything works. And what you're doing is trying to iterate on the boundaries. So I think to your point, I mean, what you just said, Chris, reminds me so much of Barry Diller's recent book, where he just sort of like hated any sort of data point that was coming in from the start, especially about sort of like marketing for the movies, because he was like, how are you supposed to know that this is going to work for an audience? And I think for us, we're working in an industry and in a space that's actually never existed before. So what I come back to with the team is, human emotions don't change, boundaries change. And so as this new technology exists, we do know some of the emotional relevance. And so how do we kind of try to tap into things that we've seen work before, not work before, test, and let people experiment. And then also let people come in and say like, this thing just like didn't work, or this was great, but this didn't, or like global events are crazy. How do we iterate on our strategy based on the fact that we might not be the most important thing for the next 3 months, right? And so you kind of have to have that honesty. So what we try to do is just curate an experience where people are all really good in what they do. We're just not the same. And that's what I love about the team that I work with, like all from many different countries, many different perspectives, and a lot of different ways to approach a single topic, which then gives us a chance to say, you missed this, and we should think about it that way. So, and then, you also have to have people, because it's a newer category, that use it, right? Like I have people on my team that are the biggest AI learners, testers, experimenters, and they're the ones that are bringing in something new and unique. But when I first joined Ledger, Discord was like quite big. And literally to build the brand and learn, myself and one other person would do these small Discord calls with 25, 50 people almost every day of the week. And we like really tapped into the brand through these micro experiences that grew, And so it's like you kind of have to go through all of these different angles to find the marketing perspective that works best for you.
Yeah, one of the advantages of AI is it can give you lots of information and novel ideas. One of the downsides is that it also is a new mean, because everybody's using it in similar ways, at least on a baseline. And so, I jokingly refer to it as the latest version of clip art, which was fascinating the first week it came out, and then it was exhausting an hour later. And,
right.
I do think, though, one of the more powerful things we're seeing is the ability to look into a social graph and find threads and ideas that are coming out that are really interesting to participate in and have conversations around and offer a perspective. Because brands they take on like a life of their own if they're done right, and people give them permission, especially if they don't have repetition in their cycle. I mean, that's one of the things that's exhausting, and I make fun of the CPG brands for saying the same thing over and over and over and over again.
Yeah.
And just, so tell us how you find that sweet spot of freshness, innovation, and cultural relevance, because globally, there's so many demands. Having worked globally most of my career, even the way you do hand gestures, matters.
Yes. I mean, so there's a couple of things. One, which I learned well at Vice, is, think global, act local. So you have a global strategy, and then you're able to implement it in market in a way that's more relevant and nascent. And that's really fun, first of all. Second is we definitely think about the fact of like, how do you let the brand play? So I'm a big believer, like if I was still in the media business, that everything that comes out today should actually have a track that's meant for fan experience. So if you're an audience member, you should feel like a little bit of the story is choose your own adventure outside of it for like fan fiction or whatever. And we treat things the same at Ledger. So when NFTs were huge in 21 and 22, we literally had NFT artists who were making art where Ledger was in the artwork. And we were sort of like the Air Jordan of the space. And then we would always show love by actually paying and working with real digital artists for our campaigns, or to bring incentives to, update the device or do different things or create work that specifically fit on our secure screens. And so we built this really great relationship with artists where they would just naturally be including us, which we loved. Like, interpret the brand, take the brand, make it your own. We also have a brand book that's open source. So anyone that's interested in utilizing different aspects or understanding how we've made it can go to that and download it and learn it, which I think is awesome because we want to be like upskilling as much as possible. And then in a third way, we continue to make it so that like We know that there are, of course, like editorial moments every year that you kind of need to hit. But the reality is like the way people are using the product is different all the time. And so it makes it so that the campaigns we're able to work with are continuing to change. And that's so fun. Like what our creative team works on for, we just did a tease at South by Southwest that was sort of like Spurs related, but it was also this wallet upgrade of all of these new things you can do with it. And the way that they approach that, like they continue to challenge themselves. Because if you look at the Revoluts and other fintech companies, they're starting to all look the same. And we don't want to be that way, right? And so we really think about like what is the human touch in our art direction that makes it so that we can continue to have fun with people. We also a few years ago did a game called School of Block that was a digital game where the good guys had like a shield, a ledger shield, and bad guys were scammers and hackers. We had over 4 million people use that game in the first few months, and we had a UGC competition where they created their own characters to see who could win to get into the game. So you just have to kind of see like what's happening in the moment and not be precious and say, okay, can we create a chance to play here? Because otherwise, to your point, and what's so sad about like the CPG brands that you're mentioning is I remember from the Vice days, they could have taken great risk to talk about the variance of the customers they actually have using those hair products, but chose not to out of this idea of like brand safety. And so I think a lot of CPG brands actually create products because the retailer is the client and the aisle is the client versus the real person being the client. So I'm actually happy to see a lot of like category diversification happening, and that they're finally catching up to that a bit. And I think that's actually like a very interesting opportunity for a lot of marketers out there. But you could like literally look at what Walmart's doing for like ketchup. It's a very interesting world out there from a marketing perspective right now. I think it's more like what channels can you use to actually reach people so that it's not falling on, bots and fake algorithms.
Well, and the more successful brands are almost doing unmarketing, meaning not, they're not thinking broadcast plus, right? It's not a typical channel plan. It's really about cultural awareness and play information.
Yes.
So if you can learn while enjoying and even if it's not right for you, you're invited into one of the things that disturbs me about so much of marketing or advertising is it tells people what to think. And in many cases, some brands even make fun of the customer. And it's like, why would you ever do that? Instead, honor their intelligence, invite them in and challenge them in a positive way. Not everybody will join, but those that do, and you really only need the kernel of those that do it with great care to be successful. And that's the myth of marketing is the nature of precision, and marketing is not being right for everybody.
100%.
Yeah.
100%. I love what you're saying. It reminds me of early Supreme worked because they used to go to the skate parks and just give stuff out to the kids and just be like, do what you want with it. I think there's this notion still because of the term marketer that your success is dependent on your budget size. And it's like, look at what they're doing at nothing. Look at what, some of the best brands, it's just like under the table. And I think that's really exciting. And to your point on celebrating the intelligence of the customer, yes, I think the customer is often completely overlooked by a lot of brands.
Well, and what's interesting is if you do that and do it well and with great care, you also energize your team. And we've always said, the degree to which your team is energized by what you're doing should be your first metric in success, because if you can't get people excited about it, then you've failed fundamentally to represent the culture of what you are doing, right? Because products and services are really the secondary thing. It's the culture, energy, and the humanity around whatever the brand is. And I love the way you talk about that. Let's talk about your partner programs. Imagine, because you mentioned that you integrate and collaborate with lots of different entities out there, but because your brand is very different and the ethos you bring to it, the way you market is very different. How do you mesh that with the those that are a bit more staccatic and traditional in their approach?
Well, the beauty of the brand is that it is vast. So we have some that are more of those sort of like fashion or, that kind of world, right? Like the Ambush, Balenciaga, Fendi, etc. And that's really fun. And then we have others that are fun just in a different way, like when we've partnered with PayPal or MoonPay or some of these more traditional players. For them, it's actually we're bringing this sort of like next wave of a type of customer that might not have been validated yet by someone in our space. And we are the adult in the space that people want to work with, right? Like we pride ourselves that sometimes we're cut out of interviews because it was too boring. And that's because we don't need to be like bombastic or chasing. And in those cases, we are saying like, let's bring financial literacy to the table. Let's be more of an experience on a kind of exchange and going with the partner, like what audience are you trying to reach? Who can we provide? Who are we trying to reach and what can we do together? And that's been successful in the work that we've done in the past. And it's made it so that when we work with partners, we're very selective. And because we don't take data, we have a very specific approach of how we're kind of like going after different ideas with them. But similar, like Best Buy is an incredible partner to Ledger. We sell at every single Best Buy in the United States. Amazon is a great partner for Ledger, both of which actually have created categories for us. We used to be sort of like computer accessories when we started back in the day, and now we're next to Apple products in the store. And so you have to spend the time and understand like what makes this worthwhile. And so that's been a really interesting experience because it's totally different than the, very small number of units that you're making on the more luxury side, right?
Well, and I like the way that what I heard there is that you're true to your brand, but you find ways to connect logically and authentically with the inherent brands for their strengths, while in some ways even recognizing their weaknesses.
I think that's the beauty of it, right? Like every brand should have their own set of guidelines that they're not willing to compromise on because it's the representation of it. And then you should always know with a partner what are the areas that you're looking to gain the most and really improve on by gain, right? And how can you be transparent with a partner you're working with? Because a partner you're working with is people. And those are people on the other side that also like are trying to make wins for their team and their company. And human beings either like to work together or they don't. So the best partnerships at work come from people you have made a good relationship with and you're honest with. And then how can you like build from that together versus kind of guardrailing your brand and pretending around certain areas. Like I wouldn't recommend that for any marketer or anyone in sort of business development. Obviously outside of specific things you have to take control over, but no brand is built through opaqueness.
If we could just extend that into politics, the world would be but now I'm just getting crazy. So
I mean, we can hope, we can dream.
yeah, right, exactly. So you touched on at South by, you've teased some of the stuff that's coming up. What else would our listeners want to know that you can share now that it's big news coming for Ledger?
Well, we have some very exciting announcements coming for Ledger Wallet. So I'm, keep posted on that. I'm very happy to share. We're really thrilled that the Spurs are going into the playoffs. And so we're going to have some exciting kind of like giveaways and updates around that coming with the Spurs. And then every year we do something called Ledger Open, which is our version of, WWDC. And that's always in the fall. And that's when we make our biggest announcements of the year. But I would say by the time this episode comes out, we will have made some really significant announcements around our Ledger Agentic product roadmap. And I think people should be very excited to know what it means to have proof of you with Ledger, and would really recommend that you go to our social feed on X or on whatever platform of your choosing and read some of those announcements, because I think in a few years we'll look back and say like, okay, this is the time when these things really changed for consumers.
That's super exciting. I'm on the edge of my seat because the notion of agentic unfortunately has been bastardized by it being so many things that aren't effectively agentic being called that. So it'll be interesting to see how you play it. And I have ideas in my mind and big hopes for what's coming. So
we'll talk in a year and we'll see how it all went.
I love it. Let's do that for sure. So Ariel, this has been fantastic. As a kind of closing note, is there a little known fact about you that you'd care to share?
So I have a crazy family fact, which is that my grandfather was pardoned by Richard Nixon.
Oh, wow.
Yeah,
Wow, that's crazy.
I know, right? Yeah.
That is so, especially in the world we're in today. So that's super interesting. And can you disclose for what or any context there, or is it just?
It's crazy because I was doing family research when I was at Vice, and so when you're a producer, you're like used to, FOIA documents and reaching out to the congressional library. It was a small tax issue that he had, and he spent like one summer in jail. I think it was very sort of Goodfellas style in Chicago, and was pardoned. And I found it by doing family research around it, and I'm still actually inquiring. There might be like a separate side project coming from something like that, but it's different times, different and the same times, I guess.
Yeah, right. That's awesome. Well, that sounds like a reasonable pardon compared to what we're experiencing these days, in my view. But
No comment, but
again, that's a whole nother podcast, right? Yeah. Well, Ariel, thank you so much for being with us and all you shared. Absolutely inspiring. I love the way you think and the way that that you can just see the sparkle in your eye and your heart for finding those ideas that bring people to life and deliver value in the end. It's about delivering value through storytelling and creating context. So thanks for the good work you're doing there. And thanks for all you shared with us and our listeners.
no, thank you for having me today, and thank you for such a thoughtful discussion. I really also appreciated the way you're thinking about it for marketers and your own experience. So, yeah, looking forward to it.
Awesome. All right. With that, we will wrap up another episode of Beyond the Brief. Stay tuned because there's always more. And with that, have a great one.